Okey diyoruz. En son ne oldu? Bundan önce okuduğumuz bölüm Ağrı Ağlı dedi. Sadece felaket üzücü bir bölüm ama üstüne çok düşüne düşüne artık alıştım. Kesinlikle kötü hissetmiyorum kendimi. Bundan önceki bölüm bu kadardı. Bütün gün ağlamış Ağrı. Bu bölümün başlangıcından ben Ağrı'yı walk hani en son uyuyakaldığını anlıyor. Sanırım ağlamaktan. Bu bölümde böyle başlıyor. Başlıyor. The Angry Dark bölümün adı bu. When Ari woke on the fourth day, things had changed. She could tell before she stretched awake, before she cracked her eyes into the seamless dark. Foxen was frightened and full of mountains. So today was a tapering day, a burning day. She didn't blame him. She knew what it could be like. Some days simply lay on you like stones. Some were fickle as cats, sliding away when you needed comfort, then coming back later when you didn't want them, jostling at you, stealing your breath. No, she didn't blame Foxen, but for half a minute she wished it was a different sort of day, even though she knew that nothing good could come from wanting at the world, even though she knew it was a wicked thing to do. Even so, burning days were flickersome, too frangible by half. They were not good days for doing. They were good days for staying put and keeping the ground steady underneath your feet. But she only had 3 days left. There was still so much to do. Moving gently in the dark, Arya picked up Foxen from his dish. He fairly smoldered with fear. There would be no persuading him like this, so sullen he was nearly truculent. So she gave him a kiss and returned him to his proper place. Then she made her way out of bed under the tenebrific blanket of the full and heavy dark. It made no difference if her eyes were open, so she left them closed while her hands sought out her cedar box. She left them closed while she brought out matches and a candle. She dragged a match against the floor where it spittered, sparked, then broke. Her heart sank. A bad start for a bad day. The second match hardly sparked at all, just gritted. The third snapped. The fourth flared and faded. The fifth ground itself down into nothing, and it was all of them. I sat for a moment in the dark. It had been like this before sometimes, not for a long time now, but she remembered. She had been sitting like this, empty as eggshell, hollow and chest heavy in the angry dark when she first heard him playing. Back before he'd given her her sweet new perfect name, a piece of sun that never left her. It was a bite of bread, a flower in her heart. Thinking of this made it easier for her to stand. She knew the way to her bed table. The basin had fresh water. She would wash her face and hands. But there was no soap. She'd used the last of it, and all her other cakes were off where they belonged in bakery. She sat down on the floor again beside her bed. She closed her eyes. She almost stayed there too, all cut string and tangle-haired and lonely as a bottle. But he was coming. He would be here soon, oh sweet and brave and shattered and kind. He would come carrying and clever-fingered and also unaware of oh so many things. He was rough against the world, but even so, 3 days. He would come visiting in 3 short days. And for all her work and wonder, she hadn't found a proper present for him yet. For all that she was wise about the way of things, she hadn't caught an empty echo of anything that she could bring. No proper gift, nor nothing yet to share. It simply wouldn't do, so Ari gathered herself in and climbed up slowly to her feet. There were 3 ways out of mental. The hallway was dark, the doorway was dark, the door was dark and closed and empty and nothing. So, without friends or light to guide her, I made her slow and careful way out through the hallway, trekking toward 3. She went through candle beer, her fingers brushing the wall lightly so she could find her way. She took the long way round, as the waltz was far too dangerous without a light. Then halfway through Pickering, she stopped and turned around for fear that she would find the black 12 ahead. The air above as dark and still and chill as the pool below. She could not bear the thought of that today. That meant there was no way for her but damp and moldy scaperling instead. And if that weren't enough, the only proper way through Dunnings was unnecessarily narrow and all adfurled with webs. They got in her hair, which made her sticky and cross, but eventually she found her way to tree. The tiny tickling sound of running water in the cold well came to greet her, and it was only then that she remembered how hungry she was. She found her few remaining matches on the shelf and lit her spirit lamp. The sudden brightness of it hurt her eyes, and even after she recovered, the yellow jumping flame made everything look strange and anxious. She put the 5 remaining matches in her pocket and took a drink of water from the cold well. The shelves looked more empty than usual in the old, jittery light. She rinsed her hands and face and feet in the icy water. Then she sat down on the floor and ate the turnip in small bites. Then she ate her last remaining fig. Her tiny face was grey, the smell of nutmeg prickled in the air. All flickering and sticky with web, Ari made her way to bakery. It wasn't ovenny today. It was hunkered down and sullen like a forgotten kiln. Nasıl okunuyor emin değilim. She passed the mellow pipes and turned again before she made her way to the little bricky niche so perfect for her hoard of soup to season in. Not hot but dry, and there was no soup. Her soap was gone. But no, it was the shifting light from the spirit lamp tricking her, all old and yellow. It threw shadows everywhere. It changed the underthing. It couldn't be trusted. This was obviously a different little bricky niche, empty as anything. She turned around and followed her own footsteps back to Emberling. Then she went back, counting turns, left and right, left and right. No, this was bakery. This was her niche, but there was nothing there. No burlap sack, no careful cakes of perfect summer soup. Even in the low red radiance of that place, I felt ice in her belly. Was someone in her underthing? Was someone moving things about, rocking up the smoothness of all her long, hard years of work? All watery and loose inside, she searched about, peering around corners and shining her lamp into shadows. Barely 10 feet away, she found her burlap sack torn to tatters. Underneath the scent of her sweet Sina soup was a smell of musk and piss. There was a tuft of fur where some small climbing beast had rubbed itself against a jutting brick. Ari stood, all tangled haired and sticky. Her tiny face was stunned at first, numb in the flickering yellow. Then her mouth grew furious. Her eyes went hard. Something had eaten all her perfect soup. Reaching out, she took the tuft of fur between her fingers. The gesture was so tight with rage, she feared she'd snap and crack the world in two. 8 cakes, an entire winter's worth of soup. Something had eaten all the perfect soup she'd made. It dared come here, into the proper place for soup, and eat it all. She stamped her foot. She hoped the greedy thing shit for a week. She hoped it shit its awful self inside out and backward, then fell into a crack and lost its name and died alone and hollow empty in the angry dark. Birden nedense kvot gibi lanet okumaya falan başladı. Kafasından bunda feylilik var diyoruz. She threw the tuft of her down on the floor. She tried to run her fingers through her hair, but they snagged up in her tangleness. For a second her hard eyes went all brimful, but she blinked them back. Hot from bakery, and all sweat with rage and the unrightness of it all, Ari turned and stormed away, her bare feet slapping angrily against the stone. Heading back to Mantle, Ari took the shorter way. All draggled and smirched, she took a moment to dunk herself in the pool at the bottom of the Silver 12 and felt a little better for it. It was no kind of proper bath, a dip, a rinse, and chilly, but better than nothing, if only just. The moon peered faintly through the great above, but she was kind and distant, so Ari didn't mind. Getting out of the water, she shook herself and rubbed her damp skin with her hands. She couldn't think of going back to bakery to dry, not today. She eyed the moonlight peering in the grass above and had just begun to squeeze the water from her hair when she heard it. A tiny splashing, a tiny mewling squeak, the sound of distress. She dashed around in a long moment of panic. Sometimes a lost thing found its way down to the bottom of the 12 and fell into the pool while drinking. It took a breathless time to find it. Her damned awful flicker light seemed to shed more shadow than it burned away. And echoes came from everywhere, scattered by the pipes and water in the Silver 12, so ears were hardly any help at all. Finally she found it, a tiny thing, mewling and paddling weakly. It was the next thing to a baby, barely old enough to be out on its own. Harry took hold of a hanging brace and leaned out long across the water, one leg lifting up for balance while her other arm went out above her head. She stretched like a dancer. Her hand described a gentle arc and dipped into the pool, gently scooping the tiny, draggled thing up, and it bit her. It sunk its teeth into the meaty bit between her finger and her thumb. I blinked and pulled herself back to the edge, cupping the small skunk gently in her hand. It struggled, and she was forced to grip it tighter than she liked. If it fell into the pool again, it might gasp and drown before she found and fetched it out. Once both her feet were back upon the stone, Ari made a cage for the tiny skunk with both her hands against her chest. With no hands left to hold her lamp, Ari trusted to the moonlight as she scurried up old iron ways. It squirmed and scratched at her chest, fighting to be free, biting her a second time on the tip pad of her smallest finger. But by then she'd reached the nearest grate. She lifted up her hand and nudged the poor lost thing outside, out of the underthing and back toward its proper nighttime place of mothers, bins, and cobblestones. Ari made her way back to the bottom of the Silver 12 and ducked her throbbing hand into the pool. It stung quite badly, but truthfully, it was her feelings that were worst hurt. It had been a mortal age since anything had been so rude to her. Her name hung dark and heavy in her chest as Auri dragged her dress on over her head. It didn't fit her properly today. It felt like everything was leering at her in the yellow light. Her hair was dreadful. Ori walked back to Mantle, taking a long way around to avoid the van so she wouldn't have to see herself in her mirror. Coming into port, she saw that nearly everything was wrong, of course. It was just that sort of day. She set the lamp on the table harder than she needed to, making the flame jump high. and she did her best to set the place to rights. Holly bundled close beside the folded secrets of the all uncut octavo book, no, by itself on the farthest edge of second shelf. The resin wanted its own space. The brimful jar of dark blue laurel fruit moved back onto the corner table. The tiny stone figurine perched high upon the wine rack, as if it were so much better than the rest of them. A Book of Secrets. Biraz keşke böyle bir kitap olsa da okusak. Okay. The only thing that kept its place was her new won perfect piece of honeycomb. She almost took a bite of it for no good reason other than to brighten up her day. She might have, too, selfish as that would be. But she couldn't bear the thought of touching it, given the state that she was in. When things were squared away as well as she could manage, I took the lamp and stepped through into mantle. Her cellar box was in a state of minor disarray, and there were broken matches thrown about, but both of those were quickly mended. The brazinger was fine, her perfect leaf, her box of stone, her ring of autumn gold. Her grey glass bottle filled with lavender, all fine. She felt herself relax a bit. Then she saw her blanket. Her perfect blanket she had made herself in only the most proper way. It had twisted and the corner lay all naked on the floor. Armida stood there for a long moment. She thought that she might cry, but when she felt around inside herself, she found she had no crying left. She was full of broken glass and burrs. She was weary and disappointed with all of everything, and her hand hurt. O kadar huysuz ki bana da geçti şu an. O kadar huysuz bugün. Tamam tatlım diyoruz. Arada böyle olur. Devam. But there was no crying left in her, so instead she gathered up her blanket and carried it to Billow's. After searching out a clean brass pipe, she hung it like a curtain in the center of the tunnel, let the endless wind brush past, and watched it wicker gently back and forth. It billowed and laughed, but that was all. I frowned and moved to pull the blanket down again, but she was careless, and a puff of wind blew out her lamp. Relighting it cost her another precious match. Once Billow's was full of flicker light again, I tucked the blanket down, turned it over, and hung it on the pipe again, but no, front ways or back ways, it didn't make a lick of difference. Next she climbed old iron ways and found a grate that loved the moon the most. Her pale light feathered down like snowdrops, like a silver spear. I spread the blanket out to catch the moon to bask in it. It didn't help. She carried the blanket backward through the hall of Winoway. She took it to the top of Draughting, threw it off, and watched it plummet through the maze of wires until it snagged one near the bottom and hung there, bobbing gently up and down. She carried it back to Mantle and wrapped it round the horrid, gelling, stubborn brazen jeer that stood there gloating and golden in the flickering light. None of it did a bit of good. Unable to think of anywhere else that might have eased the offense, Auri carried the blanket all the way down to Wayne's and into her new perfect sitting room. She draped it over the back of the couch. She folded it and set it in the chair. Finally, in true desperation, I set her joy and spread her blanket flat across the lush red rug in the center of the room. She smoothed it with both hands, careful not to let it touch the stone of the floor. It overlapped the rug almost perfectly, and for a second she felt hope rise in her chest but no, It didn't fix things at all. She knew it then. She'd known all along, really. Nothing was going to make the blanket right again. Scolding, I snatched the blanket off, wedged the ungrateful thing into a ball, and headed up the unnamed stair. She felt flat and scraped as an old hide, dry as paper written on both sides. Even the playful teasing of the new stone stair could stir no breath of joy in her. She climbed over the debris, through the broken wall, and into Tamrud. The room looked different in the yellow flickering, full of looming fear and disappointment. And when her eyes passed over the vanity, she saw it differently. It was not rakish now. In the shifting light, she saw it had a sinister bent, and caught a glimpse of what was turning it from truth. She could feel the tattered edges of its disarray, but tangle-haired and sticky, all unwashed and hollow as she was hardly in the proper state for mending. She was in no mood to tend to the ungrateful thing. Instead, I knelt before the wardrobe and set a spirit lamp beside her. Her knees were chilly on the stone floor as she pulled open the drawer and looked down at the creamy folded sheets inside. Harry closed her eyes. She took a long, stiff breath and sighed it out again. Eyes still closed, she stuffed the blanket hard into the drawer. Then she laid her hand upon the topmost sheet. Yes, this was fair. Even blind, she could sense the sweetness of it. Her fingers trailed across the creamy surface. She heard a tiny freezing noise and caught the scent of burning hair. Iris sprang back, scrambling madly backward on all fours, away from the vicious, spitting yellow flame. Catching hold of her hair, it was cold comfort to see only a few stray strands were charred. Iris stormed back to the wardrobe, snatched her blanket up, and slammed the drawer, too furious to even think of being properly polite. Then, climbing through the broken wall, Iris tapped her toes against a jutting block of stone. She didn't drop her lamp, but it was a near thing. Instead, she merely cried in pain, staggering to catch her balance. Iris sat down hard upon the floor, clutching her foot. It was only then she realized she dropped her blanket. It was laying on the naked stone beside her. She grit her teeth so hard she feared that they would break. After a long moment, she gathered up her things, trudged back to port, and stuffed the blanket angrily into the wine rack. Since that's where it belonged now, since that's the way things had to be. Okay, böyle bir resmimiz var. I spent a long time sitting in her thinking chair, glaring at the brazen jeer. It was all glimmer and warm honey in the yellow light. She glared at it all the same, as if it were to blame, as if it were the one that made a mess of everything. Eventually, her sulk burned out. Eventually, she called enough to realize the truth. You couldn't fight the tide or change the wind. And if there was a storm, well, a girl should batten down and bail, not run the rigging. How could she help but make a mess of things, the state that she was in? She'd strayed from the true way of things. First, you set yourself to rights, and then your house, and then your corner of the sky, and after that, well, then she didn't rightly know what happened next. But she hoped that after that, the world would start to run itself a bit, like a gear watch proper fit and kissed with oil. That was what she hoped would happen. Because honestly, there were days she felt raw. She was so tired of being all herself, the only one that tended to the proper turning of the world. Ari'nin peygamber olması muhabbeti. Still, it was Salg or Seyil. So Ari stood and rinsed her face and hands and feet. There was no soup, of course. It was no kind of proper wash. It didn't make her feel even a little better. But what else could she do? She brought the lamp to her lips and puffed out the yellow tongue of flame. Darkness flooded in to fill the room, and Ari climbed into her narrow, naked bed. Bölüm bittiğine o kadar emindim ki. Ari lay in the dark for a long while. She was tired and tangled and hungry and hollow. She was weary in her heart and head, but even so, sleep would not come. She thought it was the loneliness at first, or the chill that kept her gritty-eyed and shifty. Perhaps it was the dull ache of her twice-bit hand. But no, those were no less than she deserved. They were not enough to keep her all wide-eyed at night. She'd learned to sleep with worse than that, back in the times before he'd come, back in the years before she had her sweet new perfect name. No, she knew what the problem was. She slid out of her bed and brought out one of her few matches. It struck on the first try, and I smiled wide in the red light of its sulphurous flaring. She lit the spirit lamp and carried it to port. Guiltily, she removed her blanket from the wine rack where she'd stuffed it. She smoothed it gently out across the table, murmuring an apology, and she was sorry, she knew better. Cruelty never helped the turning of the world. She folded the blanket carefully, then her hands gentle. She meshed the corners and kept it square and true. Then she found a proper place for it upon the bookshelf and brought the smooth gray stone so that it wouldn't want for company. It would be cold at night and she would miss it, but it was happy there. Didn't it deserve to be happy? Didn't everything deserve its proper place? Still, she cried a bit as she tucked the blanket in, settling it on the shelf. Ari made her way back into mantle and sat on her bed. Then she went back to port to make sure her crying hadn't scared things all about, but no. She brushed the blanket with her hands, comforting. It was as it should be. It was happy. Back in mantle, Ari moved about the bare room, making sure everything was as it should be. Her thinking chair was just so. Her cedar box was flush against the wall. Fox's dish and dropper jar were resting on the bed shelf. The brazen jeer sat in its niche, indifferent to the world. The fireplace was empty, clean and trim. Her bedside table held her tiny silver cup. Above the fireplace on the mantelpiece sat her perfect yellow leaf. Her small strong box of stone, her great glass jar with kind dried lavender inside, her ring of sweet warm autumn gold. I touched each of these, making sure of them. They were everything they ought to be and nothing else. They were fine as fine. Despite all of this, she felt unsettled here in her most perfect place. I hurried down to Borough, brought back a broom, and set to sweeping Mantle's floor. It took an hour, not because of any mess, but I swept slowly and carefully, and there was quite a lot of floor. She didn't often think of it, as Mantle hardly needed tending anymore, but it was a big place. It was hers, and the place loved her, and she fit here like a pea in her own perfect pot. But even so, there was a lot of empty floor. The floor all fresh. Audrey returned to the room. On her way back, she wandered through port to check on the blanket. It seemed to be doing well, but she brought the holy bottle over to keep it company too, just in case. It was a terrible thing to be lonely. She stepped back into mental again and set the spirit lamp on her table. She took her 3 remaining matches out of her pocket and put them on the table too. As she sat on the edge of her bed, I realized what was out of place. She was herself in disarray. She'd seen something in Tumblr and not tended to it. I thought of the 3 mirrored vanity, and a tickling finger of guilt ran itself along the edge of her heart. Even so, she was tired down in her bones now, weary and hurt, perhaps just this once. Arya frowned and shook her head furiously. She was a wicked thing sometimes, all full of want, as if the shape of the world depended on her mood, as if she were important. So she stood and made her slow way back to Tumbrel, down Crumbledon, through veins, through Circle Perfect, and newly then up the unnamed stair. After climbing through the broken wall, I looked hard at the vanity in the flickering light. As she did, she could feel her heart rise slightly in her chest. The shifting light against 3 mirrors, it made countless shadows dance across the bottle's stair. Stepping closer, Auri watched carefully. She would never have seen this properly without the shifting nature of the yellow light. She stepped left, then right, looking at things from both sides. She tilted her head. She went to her knees so that her eyes were level with the surface of the vanity. A sudden, sunny smile spilled all across her face. Back straight, I sat on the edge of the chair in front of the vanity. She tried not to look in the mirrors, knowing how she must appear. An unwashed, red-eyed, tangled mess, too thin, too pale. She was no kind of lady. She opened the 2 drawers instead and stared into them for a moment, letting the yellow light and shadows slide around inside. After several minutes, Ari nodded to herself. She removed a pair of gloves from the right-hand drawer and set them near the mirror by a pod of rock. Then Ari pulled the right-hand drawer completely free and switched it with its partner on the left. She sat there for a long moment, moving the 2 drawers back and forth in their new tracks, a look of intense concentration on her face. Everything at all was disarray, bottles and baubles thrown about. Despite that, nearly everything was just the way it ought to be. The only exception was the hairbrush, which I tucked into the left-hand drawer by the handkerchiefs, and a small golden brooch with 2 birds in flight, which she hid beneath a folded fan. After that, the only thing out of place was a delicate blue bottle with a twisted silver stopper. Like many of the other bottles, it was laying on its side. I set it upright, but that wasn't right. She tried to tuck it in a drawer, but it didn't fit there either. She picked it up, listening to the liquid tinkling inside. She looked around the room uncertainly. She opened the vanity's drawers again, then slid them closed again. There didn't seem to be a place for it. She shook the bottle idly in her hand and tapped it with her fingernail. The pale blue glass was delicate as eggshell but dusty. She gave the bottle a good polishing, hoping it might be a little more forthcoming. When it was clean, it gleamed like the heart of some forgotten icy god. Turning it over in her hands, she saw tiny letters etched across the bottom of the glass. They read, "For my intoxicating Esther." Ari put her hand across her mouth, but a muffled giggle still escaped. Moving slowly, her expression thick with disbelief, she unscrewed the stopper and took a sniff. She laughed openly, then hugely, from deep in her belly. She laughed so hard she could barely screw the top back on. She was still chuckling a minute later as she tucked the bottle deep into her pocket. She was still smiling when she made her careful way down the named stair and put the bottle carefully away in port. It liked the bookshelf best, and that was doubly good, as that it would keep both Holy Bottle and the blanket company. I was still smiling when she climbed into her tiny perfect bed, and yes, it was cold and lonely too, but that could not be helped. She knew better than anyone. It was worth doing things the proper way. Chaos. Eşen Amber, kapatmadan önce diyecek bir şey var mı düşünüp geliyorum. Nope, hadi görüşürüz.